And so we wanted to hold this town hall to really raise awareness and talk about what we are doing at every level to make a difference for gun violence survivors. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention's latest published statistics cited nearly 40,000 deaths by gun violence in a year in the United States. We owe it to everyone who has experienced loss and trauma by gun violence to keep fighting to prevent its infection, just as we do with any other epidemic in our country. Today, I'm so excited to be hosting this conversation with our very own Congressman Eric Swalwell, DeVone Boggan of Advanced Peace, and Shannon Watts, founder of Moms Demand Action. Thank you guys so much for being here with me virtually tonight, taking the time to have this conversation.
Glad to be here.
Of course. Thanks for putting it together.
Hey, everybody. It's good to be here.
So, as many of you know, I was a member of Moms Demand Action before I ran for office and joined the legislature. So this is an area that I've worked on for quite some time. But I have to say that it is an honor to be in the legislature right now while our state legislators come together to make historic investments here in California and to work to prevent gun violence. Last year, we allocated $9 million in ongoing support to California Violence Intervention Programs, or CalVIP, here in California. And there was a support of an additional $200 million in one-time funding across the next 3 fiscal years. This is the largest investment by any state in community violence intervention and prevention. CalVIP-funded programs focus on communities and people who are at higher risk for gun violence. These programs work on prevention through street outreach, ceasefire initiatives, conflict mediation, and help community members to heal from the trauma of gun violence. These programs are proven to work, and they decrease gun violence largely because they are led by leaders in the affected communities. And we will hear from such a leader today. So Mr. Boggan is here to talk about that work and the incredible impact he is making in our very own community. I just want to highlight how successful these programs are. In 2018, we saw homicides decrease by 3 times more in communities that had CalVIP-funded programs than those that did not. And in 2019, these programs helped California reduce gun homicides among the highest risk age group, ages 15 to 29, to the lowest rate since 1970. So these are the type of investments we should be making with your hard-earned tax dollars, programs that work and save lives and make our communities stronger. And so in addition to those incredibly important budget investments that we were making as a state to prevent gun violence, we're also moving legislation. California is the state in the nation that leads on gun violence prevention, and we want to continue to do that work to set a model for the nation and what we can do to prevent gun deaths and ensure that our communities are safe. For example, we continue to move legislation. Just this week, we moved AB 311 that will prevent the sale of firearms at fairs, which we know is a way to get around our very strong gun laws here in California. We continue to work on our gun violence restraining orders, which are incredibly important to get guns out of the hands of those who shouldn't have them. And so we moved SB 538, which allowed for the electronic filing of these gun violence restraining orders, ensuring that everybody had access to that process, especially communities where people have to work 2 jobs, and for women for whom it is incredibly hard to get to a courthouse and file for a restraining order. We also continue to fund our efforts here in California to take guns out of the hands of those that shouldn't have them. We did $5 million more on enforcement for our law enforcement agencies, and that money came in part here in Contra Costa County. Although in years past, we saw some of that money go to Alameda County as well. So continuing to work with the Attorney General's office to make sure that enforcement is an important part of this program. We continue to work on the question of ghost guns. We know that it's a really important thing to be working on. It's how a lot of people are getting around our laws. So we've moved bills to give law enforcement the tools to fight ghost guns in our community. AB 1191 required the Department of Justice to analyze crime gun data, to trace firearms, to make sure that we're using data and insight to make sure that gun trafficking stops and we are as safe as possible. We tried to move AB 1223, which would have levied a 10% tax on guns. It didn't make it, but we're continuing to work to get that through because that is how we are going to fund some of these incredibly important gun violence prevention programs that you're going to hear about tonight. I authored and passed AB 1292, which ensured that all the transfer of guns in estate sales were done through licensed dealers and led to the registration of those guns. Last year, I worked alongside Moms Demand Action to pass AB 988, work that continues, and it is work that ensures that we provide comprehensive mental health crisis services, which was important to prevent suicide, but also officer-involved shootings. So we're going to keep up this work. This session, I'm going to work to continue to make sure that we have safe storage in every single one of our communities, work that I started here in my local community with members of Moms Demand Action. And I want to say Dublin, Orinda, Pleasanton, Moraga have all done this work, and we're going to take it to the state level. I'm excited to be partnering with the district attorney's office on a new bill that will prohibit the resale or auction of firearms seized by law enforcement. We saw just recently San Jose, our neighbor to the south, be the first city to require gun owners to have liability insurance. And I look forward to seeing the leadership of our local cities do what we as a state have not been able to do, because when you lead the way, we can follow. So just a touch of what we're doing, but we're working incredibly hard at the state level. But I'm so honored to be here alongside my partner, Congressman Swalwell. I want him to talk a little bit about what's happening on the federal level. Congressman Swalwell.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for convening us. And I'm so thrilled that the leading moms advocate in America has moved to the Bay Area in the last couple of years, and we can benefit from her locally, not just as a national leader, but now locally, inspiring us and motivating us and mobilizing us to take action. And frankly, I sit here envious of what you are able to do, Rebecca, at the state level, because here in Washington, where we have a majority in the House by 4 votes, we have an even majority in the Senate with one of my colleagues in the Senate hospitalized right now. So it's a 49-seat majority, if that can even make sense. And then a president who won with about 60,000 votes across 4 states. It's a very thin margin right now. And so to pass background checks, to pass my legislation, the no guns for abusers check requirement, to pass an assault weapons ban, it requires Republicans to join us. And right now, they're just not there. But because of the work that Shannon has done, because of the work on the ground that people like DeVone has done, we're building momentum to make sure that each election that there's more money spent, more doors knocked on by gun safety groups than those like the NRA and those who have held us back. But I just want to tell you, we should be frustrated with the Senate. We should be frustrated with our own Democratic Party in the Senate, because in the House, we passed background checks. We've passed what's called the Charleston loophole. We have nearly a majority of our members who will pass, when it comes to the floor, an assault weapons ban. But in the Senate, you have an anti-majority mentality where just one senator can threaten. They don't even have to go on the floor and actually conduct a filibuster. They can threaten that they'll do that and nothing happens. And what that means is that my kids and your kids and the people we represent, their kids are not as safe at school, that we are not as safe at the mall or church or a restaurant or anywhere that we would convene as people, and that the most dangerous weapons continue to land in the hands of the most dangerous people. So we have to continue to mobilize around this issue. It's working. It's not working as fast as we need it to be working, but the downward pressure that we all can put on the Senate to get this legislation passed federally is so important. Because, Rebecca, if every state had leaders like you in its assembly, we wouldn't need the Congress to take action. But we know that in California, Arizona's loose gun laws and Nevada's loose gun laws make dangerous guns, or allow dangerous guns to come into our communities and make all of us vulnerable. So that's why we need federal laws, that are modeled after what you're doing in California locally. So I want to hear it from DeVone and Shannon, but thank you for putting this together. But we have a lot of work ahead. And again, the goal is to just make sure the most dangerous weapons don't end up in the hands of the most dangerous people.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. And I'm so grateful to have a champion like you in Washington. And you're right, we need to get people to understand that this is an issue that Americans want us to act on. We want people to stop losing their lives and stop being traumatized. And Shannon is a hero of mine for the work she's done in changing that conversation. and I'm excited to hear from her tonight as well. But I talked about the CalVIP programs and how successful they are. I have to say, in government, we rarely see programs that show the kind of return on our investments that we see out of these CalVIP programs. The data just speaks for itself and how incredible it is. And DeVone, thank you for being such an important part of that. You're changing your community and making our state better. And I'm just so excited to hear you talk a little bit about what's happening on the ground here in Contra Costa.
Are you guys ready for me?
We are ready for you.
Yeah. Well, it's good to be here, and I'm excited to speak to those listening. It's great to see you too, Shannon. DeVone Boggan, I founded an organization called Advanced Peace, and what Advanced Peace does is help cities create community violence interruption or intervention ecosystems that really help us to engage those who are at the center of firearm activity and connect them with supports, opportunities, and resources that can move them away from that activity and help them to make healthier, more responsible decisions about how they handle the conflicts that they're negotiating every single day. There are four things that I learned when I was neighborhood safety director in the city of Richmond, California, between 2007 and 2016. First thing I learned was very small group of individuals at the center of most cyclical and retaliatory gun violence in those communities most impacted by gun violence. Two, those individuals will rarely spend a day of criminal consequence or incarceration for their suspected acts of gun violence. I think that's an important thing for folks to know, is that most of these guys who are actively involved in gunfire in our neighborhoods won't suffer a criminal consequence for those gun crimes. And that has to do with, distrust and relationships between communities and law enforcement, and obviously witnesses and evidence not available to deliver a prosecutable case. When these guys do suffer a criminal consequence, they suffer them for lesser offenses, which means they're in and out of the system, or they end up a victim of gunfire themselves. The third thing I learned was that most public and community-based systems of care are not prepared to engage these individuals or are not engaging these individuals. We operate an 18-month, very intensive touch point, what we call Peacemaker Fellowship, that engages active habitual firearm offenders who remain on the streets in their respective communities. And on day one of their 18-month engagement, what we find out is that 98% of these guys aren't being engaged, provided services, connected to any public system or community-based system of care. I think that's crazy in the context of work that's to be designed to reduce gunfire, because you can't do it without engaging those at the center of gunfire. And then finally, we've got to do better, both in the public sphere and in the community-based sphere, in developing our own capacity, our willingness, our abilities, our experiences to engage those at the center of gunfire. What we've learned is that when you engage those individuals at a high level, 8 times out of 10, you're going to be able to move them from their destructive acts to healthier acts. And look, I understand that the primary question has to be, why aren't these guys in jail? And I'm one who will argue that if I'm doing my job right, if my teams are doing their jobs right on the streets, every one of our fellows should be in jail. They're active firearm offenders. That means they've attempted to hurt someone with a firearm. They've attempted to hurt someone with a firearm, and that's illegal in most states. And the fact of the matter is, they're not incarcerated, and they're more likely to do more harm and/or become a victim themselves of this dangerous, destructive activity. So we work from the thesis of until and unless, or unless and until law enforcement can take these kinds of guys off the streets, we have to have something else in our tool chest that allows us greater opportunity to be successful with helping them to reduce their levels of activity and involvement in gunfire.
Thank you so much for telling us about the work you're doing. I have another question for you. You're not getting off that easy. Can you just share a testimonial of how the work you're doing is directly manifesting itself in a reduction, a story, or
I can. Well, what I'd like to talk about data. I mean, obviously, there's several testimonials of young men who have come into our 18-month fellowship as active firearm offenders who have changed their lives, and as a result of changing their own lives, their families' lives have changed. And that generation beneath them have healthier, safer examples, information, advice, and guidance to draw from. But I like to look at data, and you can go to advancedpeace.org and look at our learning and evaluation and impact page, and you'll see these annual summaries. And I'm taking a look right now at an annual summary done for the city of Stockton, one of our advanced peace cities in 2021. We had 42 fellows enrolled in that fellowship. Now, that's important because what we did when we got there is determine that there were 42 individuals walking the streets of Stockton who were believed to be actively involved in gunfire, which means they pose a public threat to safety, community safety, but they also are most likely to be the next victim of a firearm assault as well. Those who are perpetrators on this day are victims tomorrow. That's also an important notation. But of these 42 active firearm offenders who participated in our 18-month fellowship today in 2022, 100% of them are alive. Think about that for a second. The most likely to shoot, also the most likely to become a victim of gunfire. 100% of these guys are alive. 93% of these guys have not been injured by a firearm since becoming a fellow in early 2021. And 79% of this 42, and nothing's 100%, but 79% of these guys are not a suspect in a new firearm related crime since becoming a fellow in 2021. What that does is translates into a new narrative for the city of Stockton. For example, in 2021, they had reduced gunfire by 22% as a result of our help and others. And these young men who participated in this fellowship should get some kudos because they made healthier decisions about how they handled conflicts that they were negotiating, because those conflicts didn't dissipate. And as a result of that, gunfire was reduced significantly in the city of Stockton, as an example.
That's incredible. And I think you just, what you just spoke of is just the depth of which these programs save lives and change lives and cycles of violence. So thank you for that work.
Yeah, and not only lives, Assembly Member, and to the audience, resources, financial resources, right? So in that same city, for example, the data that was developed by the University of California at Berkeley, following our guys around on a daily basis, determined that this Stockton Street Outreach, Street Interruption team, these are community members who have a common lived experience facilitating this work as life coaches, as mentors, as credible messengers who've transformed their own lives around working with these individuals. What the data tells us that in 2021, these individuals working in these communities, from these communities, interrupted 9 imminent gun violence conflicts. What that means is guns were drawn. Guns were about to be a significant role or play a significant role in how a conflict was dealt with. And as a result of those 9 imminent gunfire interruptions, $8.6 million to $22.5 million was saved to the local and regional economy. When you think about the cost of every firearm assault in the city of Stockton and San Joaquin County being about $962,000, and for every firearm-related homicide, the cost is $2.5 million. So not only saving lives, which is critically important, but also saving the state of California, cities and counties, a lot of resources that can go into helping other folks.
Amazing, the trifecta. All good stuff. Thank you, DeVone, for that. And now I'm excited to introduce Shannon Watts, who is the founder of Moms Demand Action and has really been at the center of coalescing efforts to prevent gun violence, including amplifying the work and leadership done by people like DeVone and others, and creating a movement across this country to change the conversation and help our elected leaders at every level understand that gun violence prevention is a priority and something that we care about. So Shannon, can you talk a little bit about the work you and Moms are doing?
Of course. It's such an honor to be here with you, Assembly Member and Congressman, and also with DeVone. I'm actually on the board of Advance Peace, and we work together closely. So I'm excited to see him tonight, even if it's virtually. And thank you for hosting and for being a part of this forum. I think it's so important right now, the gun violence epidemic in this country, in the midst of a pandemic, has never been more urgent. So I'm really grateful for all of the work all of you are doing to save lives in our state and to continue to be at the forefront of this issue. As Eric said, I am now a Bay Area mom myself. I am deeply invested in how we address and innovate around what is a public health crisis. And we really do have an opportunity in California to lead the way nationwide and to provide a valuable blueprint that helps assist action at the federal level as well as the state level. I also want to take a moment and acknowledge all of the Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action volunteers who may be on this call right now. Over the last 9 years together, we have built this amazing grassroots movement that is taking on the gun lobby and taking back our democracy. This is an idea in my kitchen in Indiana when I lived there at the time that started on Facebook. It was just really meant to be an online conversation, and it has turned into the largest offline movement in the country with about 8 million supporters nationwide. And we're not just moms, we're mothers and others. We are a very fierce army of students and survivors, faith leaders, law enforcement officers, really all united in a commitment to rewrite America's history of gun violence. So I want to pause and thank everyone, but also to acknowledge any survivors who are joining us here tonight. Rebecca, as you mentioned, this is an important month when we acknowledge that by early February, more Americans are killed with guns than in any other peer nation an entire year. And that is devastating and just something that is sort of hard to fathom. So this is National Gun Violence Survivors Week. It's a time that we elevate the stories of survivors. We amplify their voices in the national conversation. We know about 58% of adults or someone they care for have been impacted by gun violence in this country. And so that's why survivors are the North Star of our movement. And it really is a privilege to stand side by side with survivors every single day in this fight. So when you look at where we are with gun violence right now in this country, I mentioned at the top that it's really a crisis. And if you look at CDC data, gun violence kills about 110 Americans every single day, and it wounds over 200 more. And we know that the COVID pandemic has really worsened this crisis. There has been record gun sales, tens of millions of guns sold in the last 2 years. Gun homicides have increased significantly in cities all across the country. Unintentional shootings by children are up, something that no other peer country deals with. Firearm suicide is truly a crisis, particularly among children and teens. And then we have these threats like ghost guns, which are untraceable firearms that people can make easily at home. That's another crisis that we're seeing bubble up. And so our laws really need to catch up with the times and quickly. But we know the solution. Data shows us that strong gun safety laws save lives. We see that every single day in California. Our organization, Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action, are under the umbrella of Everytown, and we recently released a tool that ranks all 50 states on the strength of their gun laws and the rates of gun violence. So I would encourage everyone to check that out at everytown.org. But pretty intuitively, California comes in at number one because it has the strongest gun laws in the country. It also has the 7th lowest rate of gun deaths, and now the 7th lowest rate of gun ownership. And California did not become a national leader in gun safety by accident. It's really thanks to the tenacious advocacy of survivors and volunteers, the incredible persistence of federal and state lawmakers like we have on this call. And it's really the innovation of California laws that are looking at all the facets of this crisis. California recently set aside $200 million for community violence intervention programs over the next 3 years. That's a historic number. And again, all made possible through amazing advocates like we have on the call tonight. And we're also pushing cities to take action. I think it's important to remember it's not just state houses, it's not just Congress, it's also city councils and school boards. In fact, the San Jose City Council recently voted to pass a first of its kind ordinance that requires all firearm owners to have liability insurance, and it will charge an annual gun harm reduction fee. San Diego County and the city of Oakland recently became the latest jurisdictions to pass local laws prohibiting ghost guns. And then on top of that, we are passing secure storage notifications through school boards all across the country. So we are ready to continue building on this progress as we go into the next legislative session, which is kicking off right now. Also the midterms, which are just around the corner. And, we have built a lot of momentum over the last 10 years. As Eric said, the only place where this is polarizing is in the US Senate right now. We are seeing support and also true momentum all across the country at every single level. And we have a huge grassroots amount of power behind us. And so we know our feet are firmly planted on the right side of the history, and we just have to keep going.
Thank you so much for highlighting the incredible work of everyone in this movement. And, again, as a Moms Demand Action volunteer myself, it's been such an honor to work alongside survivors and see how they turn the worst nightmare into real action and saving the lives of others. So thank you for highlighting that. Congressman, one of you said something really important, which we as a legislature are really aware of, which is we are only as safe as the nearest state that is going to allow semi-automatic weapons and others to enter California. And so we have actually reached out to neighboring state legislators to talk to them about what we can do to partner in order to make us even safer in the absence of federal legislation. But one of the questions I have, and maybe we can start with Shannon answering this, is what other states are doing things that are innovative or interesting that you think we should all learn about?
Well, I just was talking about secure storage laws and policies, and it's really sort of a simple way to prevent school shootings in this country, to address gun suicides, to address unintentional shootings. And so, that is something that we're working on all across the country. It's our volunteers, Students Demand Action and Moms Demand Action volunteers have now gone to 27 school boards, including right here in the state of California. They now have to send home information about secure storage. And so, that's something that I get excited about, which is just simply looking at what the problem is: gun suicide, unintentional shootings, gun suicide, and then addressing it through very specific action that we know by data actually makes a difference. When we look at the laws, we know that secure storage can stop school shooters, for example. I think we all have this idea that school shooters are coming in off the street, when in fact, the vast majority of them are students and they have easy access to guns in their homes. And Rebecca, I know that's something that you're working on in California as well.
Yeah, we're studying Oregon's law. They passed a really great safe storage law last year that's, I think, surpassed us. So
those were three Moms Demand Action volunteers elected to the State House in Oregon who helped make that happen.
There you go. That's how it happens. And Congressman, you mentioned how hard it is to get these bills through Congress. I know there's so many of you there that are trying incredibly hard, but can you talk a little bit about what the president could do by executive order to make the country safer in the absence of action by Congress?
Yes, and also, Rebecca, I just want to make it clear, and I know Shannon will back me up on this. I don't think anyone here is opposed to the Second Amendment. In fact, Shannon and I have gone shooting together. I like to shoot. I have family members who hunt, and I think Americans should be able to protect themselves with a firearm. We just believe in this crazy idea that the most dangerous people in our communities should not have access to the most dangerous weapons. And I think the way this debate gets framed is that if you want to put any restriction at all on gun ownership, then you are labeled as a gun confiscator. And I think what Moms Demand and other organizations have tried to do is to try and move the conversation to a place where we acknowledge that, we want you to be able to shoot for sport, hunt with your family, protect yourself, but also have reasonable gun safety laws. And someone in the chat asked about the difference between gun safety and gun control. And gun safety, to me, it just means that you keep the most dangerous weapons from the most dangerous people. Now, by executive order, we actually just put together a letter that we're sending to the president, asking him to, as much as he can, put in place an executive order that would have the states look at how they can get guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. We know that you are 7 times more likely to be killed by a firearm if you are in a violent domestic relationship. And the problem, and I can tell you as a prosecutor, is that we operate almost entirely on the honor system with domestic abusers. So this is what happens. The abuser calls the police show up, the abused calls the police show up, they take the abuser into custody. There's a court date within usually 48 hours. And in most states, based on the laws that they have there, you're not allowed to have a firearm until the case is disposed of. And likely if you plead guilty or no contest, you can't have a firearm for 3, 5, 10 years. But the court asks you at your arraignment, if you have any firearms, and we're entirely on the honor system because we do not have a national firearm registry. We have to take the least honorable, the least trustworthy individual, someone who just got arrested for harming their spouse or their partner. We have to take them at their word. And more times than not, it probably doesn't surprise you, they're not forthcoming or truthful with the police about what firearms they have. And by the way, having the police go into their homes to do a search or a seizure of firearms is a very risky and dangerous proposition. And that's where many law enforcement deaths take place, is going into that type of environment. So also having a national firearm registry, which we are hoping the president would explore through executive order, would allow local jurisdictions to understand whether domestic abusers have or are being truthful when they're asked to disclose firearms in the house. And again, that doesn't infringe at all on your right to shoot for sport, hunt with your family, protect your home, for the government to know who has firearms in the community.
Thank you for that. And I think you make an incredibly important point about why we talk about gun violence prevention, right? We're trying to prevent violence, right? Which is saving lives. And that doesn't mean one isn't entitled to have a gun, and safe storage, which, Shannon has mentioned is something I worked on for a long time. At our local level, where we've passed that at several city councils, has received incredible bipartisan support, because all we're asking is that children don't have access to these guns, so they don't have accidents, so they don't, teens who won't necessarily make good choices if they're feeling depressed, won't commit suicide using a gun. And again, that's a safety measure that is critical, but doesn't deny anyone access to a firearm in their home. It just means you're taking extra measures to ensure that our community is safe. And I think that is what each and every one of us is working towards. I actually, in my first year in the legislature, I carried a bill that I mentioned earlier, focused on the transfer of guns in estate sales. So if one has a gun and they pass away and the gun becomes part of the estate in California, prior to this legislation, it didn't have to be transferred through a licensed gun dealer. It didn't have to be registered by the new owner. And it was a true loophole in what is our registration system. And it received bipartisan support. The NRA, said it was a fine bill, and, it moved through the legislative process with incredible, again, bipartisan support, because it was about safety and ensuring that guns are not in the hands of those who will do harm to our community. So I just want to reiterate what the congressman said, because it's absolutely true. So somebody put this question in the Q&A, and I think it's a really important one. And they said, it's so easy to feel hopeless when you read all the news about gun violence. What can we each do in our community to make a difference? And DeVone, I want to start with you on that one.
Well, thank you for that question. I've learned, if I haven't learned anything, I've learned this one thing, and I've learned a lot, but one thing from Shannon: remain optimistic. I mean, that's a lesson that I have heard her talk about, and certainly being on calls like this, it's been sort of a coaching for me, because I can tend to be jaded and lose hope at times when I see these storms that are happening in front of us in these communities. So first thing I would say is don't underestimate one's power, your power, to those listening, in ability to make a contribution to your communities, to get as informed as you possibly can. There are a lot of great things going on. I mean, a lot has been discussed here this evening, and not only a lot of great things and actions happening, a lot of solid results are being accomplished around this work in many different ways. And so I would just, say to folks, get as informed as you can, get connected to folks that are in these trenches doing this work. And in doing so, you can't help but be optimistic, right? Because there are folks going to work every day, committed and believing that what they are doing is making a difference. And they can't get out of bed to do this work every single day and see the kinds of things that they see, hear the kinds of things that they hear, and not believe that they are making a difference. And I think when you get connected to those kinds of things in your own local communities, because they're out there to be connected to, you can't help but to have hope and to see a bright light at the end of all of this.
Thank you. We need a little optimism on some days. Shannon, anything to add to that? I think you're an important voice in this.
Yeah, I think, again, because we're all waiting for this cathartic moment in Congress that hasn't come due to the Senate. The House has done its job, but the Senate has not. Then we think nothing is happening. The stories that DeVone is telling about the work that they are doing in communities all across the country, that is working. The fact that we have now passed background checks in 21 states, we've passed red flag laws in 19 states, we've passed laws that disarm domestic abusers in 30 states. We've passed secure storage laws in over 20 states. I mean, I could go on and on about all the ways we're playing offense. And we're also playing defense. We've gotten really good at stopping the gun lobby, at trying to pass their agenda through state houses in this country. We have about a 90% track record of stopping bad bills like arming teachers, forcing guns onto college campuses, expanding stand your ground, something called permitless carry, which the NRA is trying to pass in several legislatures right now. These are all policies that data shows actually increases gun crime or gun death. And they have a financial motive. I understand why a special interest wants to pass their guns for anyone, anywhere, anytime, no questions asked agenda. But you can support the Second Amendment and also believe that we have to restore the responsibilities that go along with gun rights. That's why, we're among all our peer nations, we have a 25 times higher gun homicide rate. It's because we have hundreds of millions of guns and too few gun laws. And in the states, as I mentioned, you can look at the data. In the states where they have strong gun laws, they have fewer gun deaths. It's pretty intuitive. And so I am very hopeful when I see the work that's being done in city councils and school boards and state houses and even in Congress, where the Biden-Harris administration has done more than any presidential administration in a generation on this issue through executive orders. I'm very hopeful. I do believe it is just a matter of time until we have every lawmaker on the right side of this issue, Republicans and Democrats alike. This is a nonpartisan issue, or at least it should be. And, if you go back to 2008, about a quarter of all Democrats in Congress had an A rating from the NRA. And then a group of really angry moms came along and said, nope, not acceptable. You're not going to pass these laws in my community. Not a single Democrat in 2022 has an A rating from the NRA in Congress. And, that is a seismic shift in American politics. And more Republicans are also starting to have conversations with us and understanding that the NRA, which has been shown to be a corrupt organization that misuses its members' dollars to line its own pockets and go on expensive vacations and spend money on private travel, that they've pulled a fast one on the American public, and they want to do what their constituents say. And so really, it at the end of the day, this is democracy, and it takes everyone's voice and everyone's vote on this issue to turn the tide. And we are getting there slowly but surely.
Rebecca, could I add something?
Of course, please.
One of the things that we do with our fellows, and it's all about, in part, generating hope where there is a great deal of despair. I mean, most of the young people that we're engaging are young adults. They live in some pretty challenging, volatile environments. And a big part of what we're trying to do is to restore or contribute to them having hope and purpose. And so one of the things that we do this thing called Transformative Travel. It's an opportunity to get these guys away from their city or neighborhood of origin. Most of these guys, believe it or not, haven't been anywhere, to broaden their horizons, to expose them to a bigger landscape, a bigger world, a bigger theater of life. And on these horizons, there's a lot of things that we do and challenges that we put these young adults through as a transformative experience. One of them is community development exercises. And what I mean by that is we facilitate in a city outside of their city of origin, things that they can do for those communities that they can't do back at home because of safety concerns and issues. So, for example, working with the elderly in a different community, feeding the homeless in a different city. And so in doing that, it creates a catharticism for them in that, they feel good about their contribution to a community and to other people who may be struggling. So in answering your question, I talked about, folks here learning as much as they can, but I think it's also important that you find ways locally to share of who you are, share of yourselves, your talents, your skill sets, your resources. They are so needed in these spaces, and they'd be so appreciated. So I would just encourage folks that if you're looking for hope, go out and give it.
I love that. And I think one of the things that touches on is how some of the gun violence prevention measures we take, one wouldn't think of are gun violence prevention measures, right? I mean, I think last year when we passed comprehensive preschool for all Californians, I think that's a measure that will change the lives of so many Californians and put them on a trajectory to be successful and not end up part of the gun violence epidemic, right? And so it's about giving hope and opportunity, and we can do so much more, and we're working on it, but we've got a ways to go for sure. So thank you. This is a question actually that Shannon already addressed, but we got it again in the Q&A. So I'm going to give it to the Congressman, which is Marion of Danville asks, are there other successful programs in other states that California should be copying? And I don't know, Congressman, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, thank you, Marion. And frankly, going back to the legislation I wrote, the No Guns for Abusers Act, which would have a model system across the country for any abuser who, is arrested and has firearms. And so, yes, the states that, have the mandatory relinquishment and a system to track the guns and to protect the victims, we are looking to have that nationwide. I think that's a good model, but we're blessed. We're in California, as you said. We generally lead the way. I'm encouraged by what Mayor Liccardo has done in San Jose, and I hope that that is something that you all in the legislature can take up and project across the state. This idea that if you are going to own a firearm, just like an automobile, that you would insure against any harm that could be done. In some states, in gun storage laws as well. Also, I don't think we can do enough to encourage responsible gun owners, to securely store their firearms. And you and Shannon has mentioned this, the Senate, and contrasted that with the progress we've made. And she's absolutely right. I mean, we have seen the sentiment in this country as far as 70+% NRA members support background checks, and there's no A-rated Democrat by the NRA today. It's just and that's the good news, but my fear, though, is that it was really post-Parkland, after that tragedy, which, we're approaching 4 years since it occurred on February 14th. Since that tragedy, so many young Americans, starting with those students and their parents and their teachers, picked themselves up out of unimaginable grief, made themselves vulnerable as they were grieving. They were marching and mobilizing, and they had these 50-mile marches across the country. And in 2018, they beat 19 A-rated NRA members. And that came along with an expectation that they would be vulnerable themselves. They would mobilize as they grieved, and that they would believe that that would matter. And yes, Shannon's right. We have done the work in the House, but we are exactly in the same position nationally on the 4-year, the date 4 years since Parkland occurred, as we were when it happened. Nothing has changed federally on background checks or an assault weapons ban. And so they should be frustrated. And we have to look at ourselves as Democrats and ask, what more do we have to do to make this happen? I really don't want to let these kids down, because they've done what they've had to do. And now it's on lawmakers who don't have to duck and cover, don't have to do these mass shooting drills, didn't have to do these 50-mile marches. All they have to do is show the courage, to stand up and break and reform the filibuster to make every kid safe in their classroom.
So I have a follow-up on that, because John from Livermore touched exactly on what you're saying, which is, he says that it seems like every time there is a spate of violence, Congress attacks the gun issue, and then the issue dies down. So to your point, right, Parkland mobilized, but we didn't see the action that those kids deserved. And so he asked, what can we do in our state to push this issue forward now and not wait for more violence?
Keep leading, because history shows that, as I said, as California goes, eventually so will the rest of the country. And I just don't think you can do enough. And if you were able to find a way statewide to have an insurance policy and for it to survive in the courts, I think that would inspire and motivate other states, to do the same. And perhaps in our lifetime, we'll see that passed federally. So just know you're on the right side of this. And also, I think it's so important that we make clear that we don't want and never will see gun confiscation, and to just keep dispelling that myth that's out there, because that's all they have. They just go to that extreme because they don't want to make the most reasonable changes. That's all they have, is that myth. But again, when you isolate and break it down and ask NRA members one-on-one, they also want responsible gun safety laws, because most responsible gun owners know that the greatest threat to gun ownership is not me or Shannon or Rebecca or DeVone. It's irresponsible gun owners, because you could see a day where, if you had more and more mass shootings and more children being slaughtered, that an irrational response would be gun confiscation, which I don't support. I don't think anyone supports. But if we do nothing, that to me is the greatest risk for responsible gun owners, is that they would get wrapped up in a massive gun grab, because people would say enough is enough. And so it's really on them, I think, to police and protect their own. And that's what I think stands in the way right now.
Thank you. I know we've mentioned the San Jose ordinance a couple times, and Kay asked a question about that, which is, who are the beneficiaries of such insurance? So you carry the insurance, but who benefits from it? And I don't know the answer to that. Shannon, do you know how that law works? out of San Jose?
Sorry, I needed to unmute. Beneficiary in what sense?
So you carry insurance, and if there is an incident of violence, what is the insurance? How does it benefit the community? I don't know if anybody in here knows that.
Yeah, I think we'd have to
Yeah.
track down the specific answer to that.
It's a new,
Well,
it's
no,
a new
it-
ordinance.
It's for the victims. It's a,
Okay.
yeah, for victims of gun violence and their
Yes.
families, funeral costs, et cetera. That's the idea behind it is, in Parkland, for example, the community there had to pay out north of $30 million, to the families. So again, it's just another way, I think, to, mitigate, what the community cost is by
Yeah.
making sure that gun owners have skin in the game, so to speak.
And I actually have it here. So if you look at the annual burden that taxpayers pay for gun violence, it's about $1.2 billion. And that includes first responders who are so bravely confronting this danger. It includes ambulances that transport the wounded. It includes hospitals treating the victims. So there is an annual fee, and that fee would be around the public cost of responding to gun deaths. And then, as Eric said, yes, that the beneficiaries would be gun violence victims and survivors.
Awesome. Thank you guys for that.
Hey, Rebecca, real quick.
Yeah.
Can I also just say something I learned when I was a prosecutor, and yes, with 38,000 gun violence deaths, and overwhelming majority, sadly, are death by suicide, and that's a greater likelihood when there's a firearm in the home, but 115,000 shooting victims last year. And so what I learned as a prosecutor was that the advancements in medical technology almost mask the problem here. So it's like almost we're victims of our own success in that the ability that first responders have when they respond to a scene, to treat a wound, and then the ability that our trauma surgeons have to also save lives. That if you were to, put a graph up, the number of shootings are going up. The deaths are either flat or going down, but that's not because fewer people are being shot. It's just because we've gotten better, sadly, through economies of scale, because there's so many shootings that, as one trauma surgeon told me, like when you treat dozens of gun violence victims every week, you just get better at it. And so I think we are almost conditioned to accept the number of deaths in our community because it has kind of like flatlined in most cities, but it's only flatlined as far as death, because you still have people who are living and surviving and will have injuries that'll follow them for the rest of their lives. And so, absent better medical technology, the number of deaths would be much, much higher.
Interesting. DeVone, anything to add on this?
No, I think you covered
Okay,
it.
well, I've got a comment here for you, which is a great one. It says, DeVone, thank you for joining and for your commentary. This is from Matthew. Your commentary supports the importance of education and rehabilitation. And he asks me and you, what more can we do to support rehabilitation above incarceration? Do you want to take that first?
Yeah, happy to. Again, I think it's important that, folks, get as informed as they possibly can and reach out to, their local representatives. I think everything starts locally, and their regional representatives, and be ambassadors and advocate for it. And with regard to that, I want to just give an example of how, this can change sort of how we fund society when folks locally are organized and really committed to creating change and ensuring that local, regional, state, and federal investments are placed in ways that do this. When I started in 2007 in the city of Richmond, California, as neighborhood safety director, the Office of Neighborhood Safety, a non-law enforcement agency inside government, the first of its kind, was the only Office of Violence Prevention like organization in government in the nation. Today, there are more than 35 such offices of violence prevention or offices of neighborhood safety around the country. And that's a direct reflection and representation of local and regional governments and philanthropy and state and federal sources of support have sort of come together and have decided that, yes, this kind of work works. And yes, we're going to commit to making more measured investments into life-affirming infrastructure versus criminal justice or carceral infrastructure.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're working incredibly hard at the state level because we know that the formerly incarcerated become our neighbors, right? And we need to make sure that when they re-enter our communities, they do so with the tools to be successful, because recidivism means more crimes. So if we can reduce recidivism,
that's right. And let me tell you, and again, I think there is an important role for the criminal justice system, and certainly we all know that we as a society, we want to rework what's happening in policing, and I think there are a lot of leaders in law enforcement working hard to do that. But 80%, I'm going to tell you, 80% of the guys that we're engaging, these are the highest risk individuals in these neighborhoods most impacted by gun violence, are looking for real supports and ways out of this. I mean, most of these guys that are doing these things, it's what they know to do, and they haven't had anyone or balance in them with them saying, no, there's a different way. So 80% of these guys are looking for a way out. I can only imagine that for those coming home for lesser offenses or even violent offenses, the numbers are probably very similar. Most folks want to do the right thing. And so we need to make sure that we are creating life-affirming infrastructure, investing in it, so that we can help those folks that really want to do the right thing and make positive, healthy contributions to their neighborhoods, to their communities, to their cities. For that other 20%, we need to do things that support them not being able to create more harm and trauma in the communities where they live and breathe as well.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And we talked about the data of the CalVIT programs, which you're very, you're a leader of. And one of the things that we're lacking, sadly, is data on our recidivism programs and how well they work and which ones are successful. And so actually I carried a piece of legislation to collect that data, to make sure we knew what recidivism programs were working, so that we could spend the tens of millions of dollars we put into this every year on the programs that work and that will help people out of that cycle. Because as you said, and, I had the opportunity to work in the criminal justice system, and so many of my clients didn't want to be in the cycle of violence. And it's our job to help them out of it and help them get a job and be able to live as productive members of our community. So thank you for being an important part of that work. We are out of time, but I want to finish with something that Patricia said, because we talked about how it can feel hopeless, but hopefully our panelists gave you some hope. But Patricia is really giving me hope. She wrote, "Success begets success. I was just at Santa Ana's City Council meeting last night with 7 other Orange County Moms Demand Action volunteers advocating for a new secure storage ordinance. Our mayor enthusiastically referenced the San Jose success, and the council unanimously supported moving our secure storage ordinance to the next step." So that is the good work of our community members, our volunteers, our Moms Demand Action volunteers, our Students Demand Action, all under the leadership of the incredible leaders here on the call. But that's the work that we're doing, protecting our kids, protecting our communities, and ending the cycle of gun violence. So thank you all so much for being here. I know we didn't get to all of your questions because you had too many good ones, so I apologize for that. It always happens, but you can reach out to any of us offline. We are here. We're here to serve you, each and every one of you. I want to thank Congressman Swalwell, DeVone, and Shannon for being with us and for all the incredible work you do every day to make our communities better and safer. And I want to thank every single one of you for coming out and taking your time to have this conversation. during Gun Violence Survivors Week, when it's really important for us to lift up these stories and these important issues. So we put the contact information for all of us in the chat. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or needs in any way that we can be supportive of you. Thank you guys for being here, and have a good night.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for leading on this. And Shannon and DeVone, thank you for inspiring us at the local and national level.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.
Text ready to 64433 if you want to join. We take mothers and others.